Karen Reed's civil case just got moved to federal court. She's suing 8 people she claims conspired to frame her for John O'Keefe's murder. The public's raised money for their defense, much to the dismay of the Free Karen Reed cult. But there's been no indictments. Have they filed for divorce from reality? I'm John, a 911 dispatcher. Drew's a 29-year Florida cop. But we're not legal experts, so we got one. Boston attorney Katherine Loftus from My Objection explains it all. All that and what it means for your weekend on the Comm Center. Wake up, America. It's the Comm Center. Make sure you hit like and subscribe for more content just like this. Like I said, I'm an actual 911 dispatcher. I've been doing that job in this community for 10 years. I'm joined by Drew. He's a Florida cop for 29 years. We're getting back into the Karen Reed case because it's going to a whole new courthouse and lots of stuff's moving on it. But Drew, if you're ready, let's just go ahead and bring in our guest. This is Boston attorney Katherine Loftus. She's got a YouTube page that you all have got to check out. Katherine, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for classing up the place.
I try.
Very interesting. Like I don't know if I'm the originator or the author of this, but I call it kind of the Karen Reed effect, which is to say that there are some very bright people in this world that have suspended reality because, in this Occam's razor world that we live in, there's one defendant who last saw her boyfriend and she was shit-faced because she's convicted of that and was fighting with him. Then she called her friends and said, I think I killed him or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing.
Told her dad that she hit something.
Right. Or there's an entire town of Canton with 40 people and 10 DAs and the Massachusetts State Police, and they're all somehow involved in this conspiracy. So obviously we need to look at the conspiracy first, right?
That's right.
Okay, so I do call this a suspension of reality, and I do it for a reason. And I'm not making fun of anybody. I have my opinions about what happened because I base it on experience. But what is your experience with boots on the ground? Probably boots on the ground. But what's your...
Well, it's been really interesting because, this case has obviously been going on for a couple of years at this point. We had 2 criminal trials. And, as you know, in any normal world, after the end of the criminal trials, usually that's it. You don't really see much, litigation. You sort of see the frenzy die down. That's not how it is here in Massachusetts. It's still very much a current topic. It's something that people are online talking about. It's stuff that the news is covering. And it almost feels like with the Karen Reed case that it's just, it's sort of like always expect the unexpected, and things really don't, there is no end to it. There's a lot more to come. And, it's been interesting to cover it, professionally. And then also really, I essentially live in the area. I live a town over from where this all happened. So I'm really right in the thick of it. And it has just captured at least the South Shore part of Massachusetts. Everybody has an opinion, and it is, ruined friendships and torn apart families. Really, really kind of interesting. We look at it like from a bird's eye view, kind of psychological stuff, how this all happened and how we got here. So it's been interesting to watch.
Katherine, could I ask some basic questions just in terms of what's going on with the trial? So they've moved into federal court. This is called by some to be venue shopping. I'm curious what your thoughts are and if there's advantages for Karen Reed, if there's advantages for the defendants. Obviously, we're going to be playing by a whole new playbook. What are some of the big changes that we're going to be seeing in this civil case coming up as opposed to the criminal case that we all just endured? And did you want to maybe break down for the lay people in the audience kind of how the standards and the stakes are different?
Sure. So as you said, we had the 2 criminal trials. The first one ended in a mistrial, the second with just the conviction on the operating under the influence, which is essentially a standard disposition in Massachusetts, so 1-year probation. And so essentially the criminal case is done. Although I will say there is still sort of discussions about potentially her being investigated by the special attorney, Robert Cosgrove, who's in the Aiken County case. they're still looking into whether there's potential witness intimidation charges for her. So it's not to say that the possibility of any criminal charges is foreclosed, but I think it's likely where we've seen the end of the criminal matters for Karen Read, but that doesn't mean we're done with it. So like you said, we're on to the civil matters, and there's 2 cases that she has, one in which she's a defendant and one in which she's the plaintiff. So the first that was filed was by the estate of John O'Keefe against both Karen Read as well as the bars Waterfall and C.F. McCarthy's for wrongful death, intentional negligent infliction of emotional distress. That's pending in state superior court. That was filed before the end of the first trial. So that's been pending for like a year and a half.
And I don't want to get I'm not going to keep interrupting you. Can you
interrupt me? Because I will keep talking. So if you have a question, please interrupt me.
Just very briefly, C.F. McCarthy has an attorney, or C.F. McCarthy's. I don't know if it's an actual dude, but C.F. McCarthy's has an attorney. It's an insurance attorney. Waterfall, their attorney, which is an insurance attorney. And then is she represented by Alan Jackson, or is he just like the trophy, the to scare everybody kind of attorney, or is he actually representing her in this civil trial?
So I think from the way I look at it is he sort of acts as her personal attorney in her personal capacity at this point, because so her auto insurer has a duty to defend. So her insurance company is paying the attorneys. Defendants do have a right to pick. So originally there was another that's a very standard insurance defense firm locally that was in for Karen Read, and then her attorneys now came in. So the auto insurance that she carried is paying to defend the suit. However, that doesn't mean they're paying all the attorneys. So she doesn't get to just have 7 attorneys and say, like, insurance company, you have to, there's contractual, whatever the insurance agreement was. But generally, I would assume that, it's an interesting question about what role Alan Jackson plays. Obviously, he's a criminal attorney. He's not a civil attorney. I see him as more of like the consultant on this case, that like he's the guy who has all of the information. And I think he and Read have a relationship in which they trust each other. And so I think it's the 2 of them sort of together. Like if you get one, you get the other. So that's what's happening in Plymouth County. Now, the second case was originally filed in Bristol County. We had heard a lot about that the civilian witnesses were going to be filing defamation claims against Read and Carney. And my understanding is there was discussions back and forth. There was a request by her attorneys in the Plymouth County case, the wrongful death case, to join all of the civilian defendants. What has happened instead of that, because that was legally very likely to fail. So they sort of had to pivot. How are we going to litigate these issues in a different court? What Read's team did is they preempted the civilian witnesses, and they filed a civil rights lawsuit in Bristol Superior Court, which is state Superior Court. And that was against Michael Proctor, Brian Tully, Yuri Buchanan of the Massachusetts State Police, then both Brian and Nicole Albert, Matthew and Jennifer McCabe, and Brian Higgins. Also to be added are the town of Canton and the Massachusetts State Police. But in Massachusetts, we have basically a process. And if you're going to sue a government agency, you have to put them on notice. They have a certain amount of time. So that's why they're not technically in the suit yet, but they will be. So all the civilian witnesses in the state police get sued in Bristol Superior Court. Instead of filing an answer in Superior Court, they filed a motion to remove or a notice of removal. You don't file a motion, you file a notice of removal to federal court. And the reason that they did that is because the claims in Karen Read's complaint are federal civil rights claims. They're really like the meat of what the complaint is. And those when you file a civil rights claim, I would say 99% of the time you're filing it in federal court. It's not that they can't be litigated in state court, but the jurisdiction usually that practitioners choose is federal court. So what they have done is they filed a notice to remove. It's now in federal court. Karen Reed's team can try to have it remanded back to state court. I think that's unlikely given that the federal court does have jurisdiction over the case and there's no procedural defects. That's essentially what the rule is that, if they technically did something wrong, they could get it kicked back to state court. So I think it's likely to remain in federal court and be litigated there, which changes the landscape of the litigation completely from my perspective.
Because of the discovery or because of the show? Basically, the show that they put on in state court.
Media was right. Seemed to be a huge part of her strategy the last time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think really both. If it affects it in a number of different ways. I think the most important from, if you were looking at it from Karen Reed's perspective, is, and it's interesting. I mean, I feel like we're sort of removed enough from the criminal trial that we're starting to be able to have these kind of conversations. But the reality is that the PR was, a huge portion of the defense. I sometimes try to, people say, oh no, it's not PR, it's just the truth. And it's like, but as an attorney, that's something you will use anything you can, right? And so they were very, very effective at, sort of using the public, social media, it's we live in a new world. And I think it's important to recognize that that's just the reality. And they've benefited immensely from that. So the problem in federal court is that there's no cameras, there's no phones, there's nothing. It's very, very, for anybody who has been in both state and federal court, they are very different.
I've been trying. I've said it on this show many times before. Look, state court is the old sitcom night court. In Hillsborough County, it's a little bit different because but it's basically just like paper airplanes But when you get to a federal courthouse as a young rookie cop or as a defendant or whatever, and you sit in there the first time and those lights are low and it's like church pews and the acoustics are right. It is like, it oozes Constitution, like a drippage of Constitution in front of the judge. There was a hearing that I went to one time where the judge stood the whole time. The magistrate, she just stood the whole time. And I was just like so intimidated by this. Now, I'm in there telling the truth. I couldn't care less. But at the same time, then the other part of that is I've been on the back end of a criminal case in the federal system, and okay, so probable cause is the cops' barrier to entry. And proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the trial attorney's, hope if it's going to go to trial after intake. And they have, 60 or 70 other cases. And they're like, now, which murder is this? But in the federal system, I'm telling you, you're not going to get that. Like you get it before a grand jury and then a year and a half, 18, 20 months later, you're still and the whole time you're just doing constant homework. You're in constant contact with the U.S. attorney. They're guiding you. They put together a case. There's no depositions rather. So in Florida, there's for any felony case or DUI or whatever, there's a deposition,
interesting
game. So in federal court, no depositions. You put your witnesses up, we'll put ours up, and you will find out what we got when we got it.
Right.
Does that mean that Karen's going to be testifying?
Well, I'm talking about the criminal side, John. So it's, the whole point I'm making is, it's like the whole game changes, so to speak. In, they're not going to. How do I put this? Every box is checked. There are no little avenues to say, well, they use solo cups or they none of that. None of that
right.
will. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's obviously for a lot of people who, watch and follow this kind of stuff. Many people have never been in a state court, never mind a federal court. And most people don't end up in federal court unless you're an attorney or you're in a lot of trouble. You want to stay out of there. But, I think your description is accurate and likely for most of the federal courts across the country. And that, in Boston, it's right on the water. The entire front is glass. It's very, it's beautifully built and it's quiet as a church mouse. And you can hear, when I walk in the hall, you hear those clicks and the big doors. And when you walk in, and what you feel is everybody here is serious.
Yeah,
we don't play any games here. We're not, this is not, we're not making the ridiculous arguments. We're not showy. There's no one to show off for, really. And,
right.
and in addition to that, I think it's interesting because you also can't, I don't know how it is in Florida and everywhere else, but in Massachusetts, you can delay a case in state court forever, especially when you have a lot of moving parts and a lot of attorneys and a lot of, discovery, I want this motion and that motion. Our federal court judges in Boston, some of them will tell you on the first time, this is the schedule. This is when you get everything done. And this is when you're trying the case. And that's it. Don't come to me asking for an extension. Right. So I just think it's to me, and I know it's from the minority perspective, and people say they removed it to federal court, so they're not going to be looked at, so they can hide. Federal court is not a place to go if you're at all culpable for anything. You wouldn't willingly go in front of a federal judge. You know what I mean? You would stay in. You would stay. I'm sorry, my phone is going off. Hang on one second.
That's okay.
Does this scream?
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Does this scream settlement to you?
I don't know. I don't think so, because I don't think what people want is settlement. I think they want the truth out. You know what I mean? I don't think I think it's more about I always used to watch when I was a kid. I used to watch the People's Court, Judge Wapner, with my grandmother, right? And then as time went on, I always loved it. It was Judge Marilyn Millian, and she used to talk about when people would come into court for $50, and she would say it's about the principle. Some people don't, it's about having your voice heard. And I do think that in many ways, I think the civil case is going to give us a lot more than the criminal trial did, because there's so many restrictions, evidentiary restrictions, and orders in the criminal court that didn't allow us to see as much as I think was out there. And I think we'll probably see more in the civil, which hopefully will allow everyone to tell their side of the story.
Right, to have the bluff called, basically. I think right. The problem in the criminal trial is that anybody who's going to testify to anything, or anybody who puts together a charge or a case or an indictment or the grand jury or whatever, sits on that stand, has to swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Anybody that's on the other side of that, where, because they're innocent until proven guilty, can say whatever they want. They don't need to be accurate. They don't need to be right. ethical. They don't need to be truthful. And in fact, all you need to do is leave this breadcrumb here and leave this breadcrumb here, and let the jury or let the public fill in the rest. Let Turtle Boy right. fill in, because he's going to get on social media and it's going to go viral. So here's what I want to commend you on the Karen Reed effect. It seems to me, and I'm not a braggart over this, but it's just kind of how I am, that I can admit defeat. I can admit when I'm wrong. I can admit, all these other things. But when I put forward something, it's because it's true. I'm not going to open, I can't risk my capital. I can't risk my reputation on putting something that's not true.
That's right.
So, and I think any cop worth their weight is kind of like that. Most attorneys are like that. And you said it a minute ago. Look, we lose friends and family over this stuff because, but it does seem like in the Karen Reed effect that the other side of this is you don't know what you're talking about. You're corrupt, just like they are. There is never a concession. There is never any
right.
wiggle that they might be wrong.
No, I think they had me pegged as being paid by the district attorney, Michael Morrissey, while I was covering the case. I was in on it. I was like, oh, I'm in the conspiracy now.
Yeah, I guarantee probably never heard of us, which is, fine. We'll do our own, business. But the other side of that is you don't know how many times in our comments that we, this little Comm Center channel, 11,000 subscribers, we are hit with, well, obviously you're being paid by the McAlbert. Right. Obviously you're being paid by DA Morrissey. Like, who are you people? What are you saying? Like there is a true suspension of reality. I mean, I'm
willing to be paid by anyone at this point. Throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, it's, I have sort of trying to, as I've been covering this case, what automatically sort of came with taking the perspective that wasn't the most popular one. And for me, it wasn't like I was coming out and saying like, oh, I think Karen Reed's guilty. I thought they had so many problems with the case, but my goal was to, as somebody who worked a long time in the district attorney's office, understands how a prosecutor thinks, understands how a case is put together, understands how a case is presented to a grand jury, and then also my time as on the defense side. What I was really trying to do in my coverage was to give people an honest interpretation of what was actually going on outside of what people, wanted everyone to say. And I think that was the difficult part in covering it, and that it became such a frenzy that to be totally fair, in the very beginning, I found the sort of, it wasn't as big as it's alleged now, but in the beginning, it was like, okay, I see these problems. Like I could potentially see that, maybe something went a little wrong here. I was fairly convinced of it. And after I really started looking into it after a couple of months, from my perspective, I just started to sort of take a step back, because what I realized was like, okay, we're in the silo that's being whipped up. And like, I want to step out of the silo and look at it. And I might still have the same opinion, but if I don't, it's okay. But I think unfortunately what, in this world we're all in, sort of like the true crime commentary, there's a lot of bad faith actors. And sometimes people don't even know that they're bad faith actors, but they're just like fed information that, gets them views and gets them, so, I don't like to go at anybody else, but I think it's important to, in this case particularly, to sort of look at like the social media true crime ecosystem and like what sells and what doesn't. And sometimes, speaking opinions that aren't exactly popular, there's no incentive really. There's no incentive in the online world to lead with what you believe the truth is. I'm sure it'll be a lot easier if all of us just went in on it and make us all some money, but then we're contributing to that madness.
I can't do that. I can't sell out like that. But
right.
Part of the suspension of reality is the fact that, like, I had this conversation on Twitter on X, the other day, where somebody who works with law enforcement officers was telling me all about how corrupt this case was, how they're still fan of law enforcement. They can't believe how corrupt this case was. Yet, the same actors, the same people, the Michael Proctors, the Yuri Buchanics, they're all doing the Walsh case right now. They're all involved. Right. And they were astonished at, and I think I even heard the reptilian talk about this, like, how is it that, just this one case, everybody's corrupt, and in this case, they did everything right. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been trying to do.
Right.
Like, you bought into some bullshit over here. You got to like release yourself from this. They did everything right here. You can attack these red Solo cups all day long. They didn't use any blood evidence. You can attack a snowblower all day long. They were in the middle of a blizzard. Oh, that's just cop-splaining, and you're just making excuses. Yeah, I am. I'm making excuses that are valid because that's what they had to deal with. But then they get over to the Walsh case, and they're like, and so just to your point too about true crime, I heard what you were saying today. People are like, after hearing everything, this guy's literally got Google searches like, how do I remove a dead person's teeth? And he's buying shovels and axes. And they're like, I don't know if they proved it. Like, I'm not sure about this. There is something in the water about this, like, true crime that everybody wants to be the one to discover the thread that unravels the entire case.
Right. And I think we were, you know, at the time the Reed case, like this all happened, we're in an interesting time in society where, you know, we're, you know, not to get too into it, but I think it is just like we're post sort of COVID, like
Yes.
BLM, like defund the police, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I think we see no matter what, you know, at the highest levels of our government, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, you see so much fraud and corruption. And so when you see a story that's compelling, you know, I in a lot of ways, I don't blame a lot of people, because I think we live in a world now where it's difficult to discern what is real and what's not. And I think that most people won't do their own research, but most people don't even know, I think, to do their own research, you know, so they look at something someone says and just says like, okay, that sounds good. You know, and then once you make it, you kind of sort of come to a conclusion. You know, one of the hardest things to get somebody to do is to change their mind and to admit that they maybe looked at it incorrectly. And most people will stop themselves. They'll never even look at that possibility. And so I feel like that's kind of where we got with the Karen Reed case, that it was like sold so well at the beginning. You know, I'm like, listen, I was persuaded by it, you know,
Right.
and I think, you know, and I consider myself pretty intuitive and intelligent, but you have to be able to sometimes step back from it. And I just think that most people I don't even know that most people have like an awareness that they should be doing that, if I'm being totally honest.
When somebody in our chat said something about how the mood might be shifting there in Boston, there was obviously a huge crowdfunding effort for the defendants. You know, it's a little bit too little too late when it comes to justice for John O'Keefe, but do you feel like there's a rise of sympathy for these 8 people that she's suing?
Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, even just when all sort of the in the midst of both the trials, I mean, there was so much division on the ground, but there were a lot of people who were saying this. I mean, the amount of private messages I would get from people who'd say, please don't share this. But like, I used to be, you know, free Karen Reader. I used to be this and that, and I'm afraid to say it now. And, you know, it's and people in real life that, you know, I spoke to. And so there were a lot of people, but most people were afraid to say that out, even in casual conversations. Like if you were at a barbecue and you said like, I think she's guilty. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but it caught, like, that's the kind of, I mean, visceral reaction. So what happened was like all those people went underground. And I think now you see a reflection that there are real people in the community who have thought this all along. And, you know, I mean, $90,000 is a lot of money that they've raised. So I think it signifies something.
Yeah, I think that's part of the social topography also, because just like you say, nobody trusts the government anymore. Nobody knows who to trust. And right. I do think that people are upset that they read the headline and believed the headline, and then the people that read the article argued with them, and now they're having to concede that the article readers were correct. And right. It's not like, you know, even when you're trying to argue your point, you just become the arrogant prick, as opposed to just saying, maybe I should look at this a little bit deeper. But I can see the visceral reaction. There's like, I think social media, because of the way algorithms work, has completely divided us. Like, you have to choose a team. It's either the Sox or the Yankees. You're not going to be a baseball fan. You will not be a baseball fan because the algorithm will not let you. You're either going to get Red Sox stuff or you're going to get Yankee stuff. And that's the way kind of, so now it becomes fighting words. Like obviously, no. You know, I've got these 10 facts. Well, you got those 10 facts is because you're only chasing those 10 facts. You're not looking at the reality over here. Like, and there are people that want to see both. Like, I want to see a good baseball game. I don't.
Right. Well, and I think too, it's, you know, it can be difficult sometimes because, you know, I actually try not to get too much into it, like one-on-one with people. Well, a lot of people do, you know, a lot of people locally will say like, oh, well, you know, my objection. Can I ask you this? And I don't mind, you know, chatting about it. But, you know, I think it is also, I think it's important to remember that, these are very, very sophisticated attorneys with, a history of success using unusual tactics sort of in the legal PR world, right? And so, it's almost, I sometimes when I try to talk to people and explain like why do I feel the way I feel and why do I think your opinion is wrong? A lot of it is, I feel like you've been propagandized a little bit, and that's really difficult to hear, whether it's about Karen Reed or whether it's about, Jeffrey Epstein or whatever it's about, that if you, it's really hard to like deconstruct that, you know what I mean? So I do think it's important to recognize that like some of the people who have been like really in this, it was made to convince people. It was tactical and persuasive and super effective, so it's complicated.
Yeah. So to your point, I want to read a couple things that I have gathered here, and I'm going to make a point, so stick with me. As a matter of fact, there's a whole playlist of our Karen Reed material. If you're not, we did like what, John, 10, 11 episodes,
12, 13, 14 episodes.
Yep. Yes. Going. And the first couple, I'm telling you, you could see where we were bamboozled, and then the light clicked. Especially with the Sandra Birchmore. Stick around for the end, folks. We're probably going to talk a little bit about that in a second, because his death penalty thing is off the table. So let me ask you, or let me just put this out here. A nationally prominent defense attorney with a polished public persona, well-known, media savvy, good-looking, articulate, sharp dresser, commands the courtroom, commands social media, or commands TV cameras. The defendant became an even greater celebrity as the case unfolded, because it became a cultural obsession. It wasn't about innocence or guilt. It was about winning, right? The defense strategy centered on an aggressive attack on law enforcement. Like, the police officers were inept, the detectives and the investigative process became the true target. The defense framed the police as incompetent, corrupt, biased, or maliciously motivated. Every aspect of evidence collection was scrutinized and challenged. Procedures questioned, chain of custody. The defense worked to turn public opinion against the prosecutors and the judge. And Catherine, I want to talk to you about Judge Cannone in a minute. Media messaging portrayed the judge as unfit or biased. The prosecutors were framed as vindictive or somehow politically motivated. One investigator was singled out and made to be the face of the alleged corruption. There was an allegation that he planted evidence. They uncovered words that he had previously said and written, and they became the focus instead of the defendant. There's the public humiliation of that investigator. He's no longer a cop. It's damaged, it's ended his career. There's a lingering stigma. The defendant ultimately walked out of the courtroom not guilty, despite national division. The jury acquitted. It was almost like a jury nullification. Public reaction was split sharply along social or ideological lines. And then the acquittal triggered an intensive civil case afterwards. The families sought accountability outside criminal court, and the civil trial became a second major spectacle. Now, did I just summarize the Karen Reed case?
You did pretty well.
Did I summarize the O.J. Simpson playbook?
It's pretty. I think Karen was the one who compared herself to O.J. and is it Vanity Fair, maybe?
Wow, what a comparison!
She really did. One of the articles, I think it was Vanity Fair.
She's
like the only one that doesn't think that OJ did it. I mean, why else would she say that?
She's still out looking for the real killer, and I guess the media became unapologetic. They became a participant in the trial. Like, what is the tone? And you did a lot of media pieces, during the trial. Like, what is the tone amongst the media people? Like, are they doing it for the clicks like the YouTube people are doing it, or are they doing it because they genuinely think that this is a story worth following?
I think for the most part, I would say that. So I did local NBC the first trial. I did CBS the second trial, and I appreciated their perspective. I thought they were pretty fair down the line. I would say that most local media was, sort of accused of being biased towards the prosecution most of the time. Here, there was one, Ted Daniels from Fox 25 is probably seen as leaning more towards the Reed side. They do exclusive interviews with him and whatnot. But I feel like in general, the media, and then we have the Boston Globe, we have the Boston Herald. Boston Globe has always been more left-leaning. Boston Herald's more right-leaning. They have Howie Cower over there, who's like a sort of print version of Turtle Boy. In Boston, longtime sort of like shock jock complainer, but very popular. And it has been for a long time. He had an article in the Herald. So, but I think that I actually think in this instance, traditional media was much, much more honest, I would say, in how things were actually being presented. Even if they were skewed left or right, they were pretty, presented it as you would want the news to be presented, versus like the online coverage, which just, ran the gamut from, all the way to here, pretty much chaos.
I think they finally picked up on the point counterpoint of, like breaking points or whatever, like, because I used to watch Canton Confidential during the trial. I can't remember what, I think that was NBC.
Yeah.
But they always had like a defense attorney and then a retired judge. Like there was one side to speak for either. And it was always civil discussion. It did seem like the news people were kind of like one-sided, but that's my perception. You know what I mean? At least presentation on the other side.
I just watched it for that one useless former juror who would have nothing interesting to say. You know the one I mean.
Paula Prado. So John said some very unkind things about Paula Prado, and she picked up on it. She watched her video and she left us a nice comment. Like, I made nice with her. We weren't attacking her personally. We were just kind of.
I meant the guy from the trial, but I also did not like her, just for the record.
Okay, that's fine.
Katherine, I have to ask you, in order to get this defamation, what are the defendants going to have to prove in their case? And in order for her to prove that her civil rights were violated, is she going to have to build a grandiose case that pretty much convinces the jury that there was a real conspiracy? It seems like it would be hard to convince 12 people of a complex conspiracy of 8 people all trying to frame her. Is she actually going to have to go to that, or is she just trying to build a strong enough case to get that settlement?
I don't think she's going to get a settlement out of it depends. You have to look at it almost, there's so many defendants that there's like almost different analysis for each one. You look at the troopers who are likely to be represented or paid for by the union or the state police themselves, in assigned attorneys, because if you're a police officer and being sued, the police don't generally just like leave you out to dry to pay for your own counsel. And then we have the state police and then the town of Canton. And so obviously they have, insurance policies that are for this very purpose. So if there is litigation, they can talk about potential settlements. And that's always something that we think about in civil court. It's different them trying to collect against the civilians, because there's less assets there. Essentially, there's not going to be as much money. You might get a $20 million judgment from Brian Albert and Jen McCabe, but you're never going to see that money because it's not there, right? There's nothing really to recover.
Well, that's where funding comes in, though. Like, these people have raised over $80,000 for or whatever. The Free Karen Reed people are mad to see sympathy for that side, but if you're a Karen Reed, aren't you glad that your opposite number in court suddenly has a windfall of cash? Isn't this good for Karen?
Yeah.
Yes, but you would need that number to be so substantial to be worth, to counterbalance like the cost of litigation. And what's interesting is because her fundraiser, so we have the civilian witnesses fundraiser, and then Karen Reed started another fundraiser, which talks about like what is being paid for and what's not being paid for. And the way I interpreted the request on her website fundraiser was that she's funding all of the litigation in the now federal court matter, because obviously her auto insurer has to pay the defender in the wrongful death suit. But she's asking for $500,000 and she listed, litigation costs and attorney's fees in the civil case. So, I mean, that gives me I would assume somebody would take it on contingency, even just for the publicity of it alone. But at the same time, this is real litigation. Like, this is expensive litigation. This is going to cost a lot. And respectfully, lawyers don't like working for free, So,
I can see. Look, I mean, I don't know if Alan Jackson was paid in this other trial. I've been bombarded that all three of them supposedly said, no, we're just so convicted, we believe her, that we're not gonna take a dime. So then where's all the money going? Like, I understand they have to pay expert. Well, no, they actually didn't have to. The feds paid for the expert witness. So, like, where's all this money going? And is she moving that, spending it? What's happening to the point where she's like, yeah, that was for the criminal trial, I need new money. And I think it probably rubs a lot of people the wrong way enough in the way that she's, like, that little infrastructure starting to cave a little bit. And I did hear Turtle Boy the other day say something to the effect of, look, we've got to live with the fact that she may have hit him. And I believe that she may have hit, she probably didn't, but she may have hit him. You know what I mean? Like, wait a minute. Well, aren't you the one that organized these rallies with bullhorns and confronted people at soccer games or football games and turned America, basically? So I want to ask you about this, because America, like the middle of America, all of a sudden thinks that Beverly Cannone is crooked. And you have personal experience with her, or maybe an outside. I don't know what your experience is with her, but is that what what is your experience?
I've appeared before her only on civil matters, not on criminal matters. I didn't practice criminally in Norfolk Superior Court. And she's always been pleasant to be in front of. But in general, she has a reputation for being well respected. She's been on the bench for a good amount of time at this point. And she also was a public defender for the entirety of her career. So she was never even a private attorney, working on the cases, then doing criminal. I mean, she was, I don't know how it is everywhere, but, in Massachusetts, if you're a lifelong public defender, we consider those like true believers. They're the people who are really, 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 believe in, fighting for their clients, like, truly. And she tried homicides and things like that. I think it's difficult, because I do think there was a point where she lost control of the courtroom, and it's really difficult once you lose control to rein it back in. But I don't know that, it would be, it would be different with some judges. Probably would have been different with a male judge, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think that, the attorneys would have gone at some of the male judges in Massachusetts Superior Court like they did to Cannone. But I think that, I think there was definitely a friction between her and the defense based on some of the things that they did in court. And I think in any normal world, someone watching that, or, people with experience, you guys as an attorney, someone who understands sort of how the inside of a courtroom works, you can understand sort of the friction between them. But it certainly exacerbated everything from, because we're not just looking at it like we're in the courtroom. There's a gazillion people watching it and, looking at every sigh and every this and that. And I just don't think it's a realistic, analysis of what was actually going on,
She's accused of calling for a hit and run with Hank Brennan. She was accused of hand signs or something at one point.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was just about going to lunch. Like people are human beings too.
Yeah.
It kind of gets back to if you're 1,000% right. If you've never been in the courtroom, or if your trial experience consists of eating a ham sandwich, watching it on court TV, all of these things may add up. But that's kind of where my arrogant way would come across, saying, look, I've been in that seat. I've literally been on that seat where a defense attorney is just ripping me apart for something I wrote in a report that I thought was true at the time, but I find out later it wasn't. So I got to tell the jury in the world that I screwed up, that I fucked up. So I wouldn't say that to the jury, but like, people just don't understand the reality. Forgive me if any of the kids are watching, but people just don't understand the reality. And when you try to explain the reality, they don't accept the reality. They want to believe what Vinnie Politan tells them, or they want to believe what, whoever tells them. So,
well, I think too, it's it's really interesting. There's this book that I would suggest to everybody to read. It's called The Death of Expertise. And, it's just, I think what's happened, because we have so much access to information online, that people think, oh, if I look up a rule and I see what this is, then I know what it means, and that everybody sort of has this idea that because they have access to the information, that makes them, in the position to be able to interpret it. And it's always, and like you said, it can come off as arrogance, but what it's, when I try to tell people, I'm like, I'm not trying to be like, I know better than you, but I do know better than you when it comes to this. There's a lot of things that you will know better than me, right? And like, I'm the first one to say, there's a lot of things I don't know, and I won't speak on them. But when I'm telling you because I know, and I want you to have the most accurate information. But that's not what people want. I don't know.
No,
it's really, it's really fascinating. It's like, I try, I just really try to emphasize that, it's important to go to people who you can trust their perspective, and then not, lean in one way or the other. But
I've always felt this way, Katherine. Like, I appreciate your perspective because you've been there. Like, when a plane crashes, God forbid, I hope you're not flying it, but when a plane crashes, CNN doesn't have an attorney come on, or doesn't have a cop come on, or a firefighter. They have a pilot come on. Right. And nobody goes to that pilot's social media page and starts attacking him and telling him he's corrupt, or, you know what I mean?
Right.
So he's the expert. It's just that this like law enforcement thing is so like low level, and just like you said, nobody trusts the government anymore. So we're all kind of screwed there. Like, it's easier to believe that there is corruption.
I think it's also people want to, I think, in a weird way, people are like, ooh, this story, you know what I mean? It's compelling. It's like, oh, wow. Because there are a lot of, I think that's the interesting thing about the Karen Read case. It's not just like, oh, they're being accused of corruption and there's no evidence of it. It's like, there's a lot of evidence of, a lot. And I do think I always try to point out to people, like, two things can be true at the same time. There's a lot of problems. You're 100% right. There's a lot of things that, like, the people who, think she's innocent, there's a lot of things that it's like, you're right. You're 100% right. But that doesn't have to equal B. You have to be able to say, like, two things can happen in the same world. Like you said with Brian Walsh, does those police officers be involved? Like, does that mean that Brian Walsh didn't do it? You can have incompetence, you can have laziness. I personally have always sort of ascribed most of this to more laziness and just sort of a lack of easy.
It could be. Well, so I'm glad you said that, because it spurned this question. I'm tired of hearing this. I don't know if you have experience with this, but I'm tired of hearing, in 16 hours they convicted her. In 16 hours they solved this case. What kind of investigation is that? And I'm telling you, I don't know what your experience is. I've solved cases in 15 minutes. Like, I've solved
right.
16 hours means nothing. And if they had waited 16 days or 16 months, don't you think they would say, it took 16 days to even figure this out? It took, because that's what they did with the Charlie Kirk shooter, or that's what they did with, in Butler or whatever. Like, there is no time schedule that's correct. But for someone to glom onto this 16-hour thing, let's look at facts. I mean, just read Proctor's affidavit. You can think he's a monster because he said the C word and she had a leaky balloon knot and all this, but he laid out facts that he swore to. And when you read them, and I reread them this morning, her arrest affidavit, or the warrant affidavit. Yeah. There is no way in God's green earth any judge that lives or breathes in the United States of America is going to grant a search warrant for the inside of that house based on the evidence that he had at that point.
I would agree with you on that. And it's interesting. It's funny. One of the first things that I actually, when I first started covering the case, that was one of the things that I was like, what, this seems, again, because what we were really looking at on the front end was mostly the defense filings, and they were presented a certain way, as all legal filings are. They're going to be tilted one way or the other, which is why it's important to read both. And the way they presented it, it was like, how do they just not go in the house and like clear this up? But again, once we sort of saw all the information, we saw, okay, what investigating were they doing that day? What was, what were the statements they had? What was all that kind of, and you think about, it sometimes I feel like it's so hard to, could we put it all back in a box and like, let's start fresh. And if you think about, what they had at the time, they had multiple people saying, yeah, he was supposed to come. He never came in. You have him laying in the front. You have Karen Reed saying, I never saw him go in the house. You have, her taillight broken. You have the CERT team finding all the taillight pieces. So
independent first responders saying, yeah, that girl over there, she was saying, I hit him. Right.
Like, right.
What do you want him to do with that information? Do you want him to ignore that and just like, oh, then obviously it must be the murderers inside here. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's what it is. It's, and again, it's a complicated, sort of a complex, to explain probable cause and what you need to get into a house, because ultimately you don't ever want to search a house that the search is going to get thrown out, because you might find discoverable evidence that could be, solve the whole, fruit of the poisonous tree. There it all goes. But at the time, what's the nexus into the house, right? Nobody puts him in the house. So, do I think, the stuff about across the street, well, I knew his ring, didn't capture it. I don't love that. Do I love like that they sat them all kind of close together at a table? You stand over here. I think to me, there were procedural inadequacies that really should have tightened up. I mean, this should have been an easy case to present and prove, right? And and to be honest, Michael Proctor not recusing himself, because it's too close to the line. You know what I mean? And if he had, it really comes down to him, because if he had taken himself off the case, there'd be no connection with the trooper to sort of pin it on. You know what I mean? So we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if Michael Proctor had, taken himself off the case.
He's paying the ultimate price, but I kept hearing, and I understand it. I completely understand it. Like, I know he's kicking himself. I know for a fact, like, I don't know the guy, but I know he's not that dumb. Like, he's obviously investigated homicides. He's like, they told me 3 million times not to fucking text on my personal phone about these cases. They also told me that, anything I put on this work phone is going to be evidence, but let me send some shit anyway. It's just, you don't do. And then, but what happens from there is, okay, so that was dumb shit stuff, but I keep hearing over and over how it's going to affect all these other cases and all this other case. Well, they did pretty well without, in the Brian Walsh case, they did pretty well at proving it without Proctor. Like, it's not, you can make that into, he is a biased investigator and they're going to pin it on the girl, which was never uttered by anybody other than a defense attorney.
Right.
But
right. I mean, that goes to show, so many people think that's actually attributed to him. And, I think with Michael Proctor, there's so much more stuff coming out about, because he turned his phone over with all the 13 years or whatever, which, I don't know. It makes me question, like, okay.
Isn't she currently trying to get access to more than just what came out in discovery and the trial? She wants the whole phone, and he's saying, well, there's stuff about other cases on here and other stuff that the man has on their phone that they don't want to have come out.
So there's like 19 or 20 cases that are being litigated in Norfolk Superior with Judge Krupp. And what we know is, per the attorney in court, is that there's like real racist, misogynistic stuff, and some of the clients are Black, and so I think there is a possibility that like his text will have an effect in certain people's cases, and they might not have anything to get the cases dismissed, but they're going to have text messages potentially using racial slurs and things like that at trial. So, I mean, there will be an effect, I think, that way, and that it's going to sort of linger. Karen Reed's also trying to get his text messages in the wrongful death suit. So she has subpoenaed from the Norfolk County DA's office all of the basically extra Proctor discovery, and the Norfolk County DA's office has responded to the motion to compel. So that is going to be heard on, I believe it's the 19th of December, in Norfolk Superior, and Plymouth Superior.
How much of that though is a louder set of symbols? Like she wants all his text messages, obviously, because she knows it's a treasure trove, obviously. But if anybody gets a hold of her text messages, you know what I mean? So is she trying to shadow with, just like, look how bad this guy is. Yeah, don't worry about me confessing to the murder, but look how bad,
Yeah, I mean, you really think about it. So she wants his text messages outside of the scope of her investigation. I think that the judge is likely to limit that. I mean, it's discoverable to a point, but what's the relevance going to have ultimately to the civil matter in a wrongful death suit? You know what I mean? And that's what, to go back to what we first started talking about, the difference between state and federal court. State court, the judges will sort of let you fish a little bit more. Federal court, they'd be like, no, you're not entitled to that, or you are order it. We're going to order A, B, C, and D. Turn it over by this time. You got to look at it by this time and move forward. But it's Judge Gilday now on the wrongful death, the Plymouth Superior case, and I think he has will likely have good control of the case, and I think most of these judges, if I'm being totally honest, sort of saw the chaos that happened in the Reed trials. And so all of the trials that I have seen in Massachusetts and all the cases going on, you look at even the Fitzsimmons case, the Clancy case, the judges are really like trying to rein it back in and say like, okay, we're not going to do a 2.0 here. So whatever we have to do to sort of keep it in line with the normal course, that's what we're going to do. So it'll be interesting to see what they say.
Not to correct you, but it would actually be a 2.1.
Yeah.
Drew here has had many terrible takes on the show, and most people just disbelieve him, generally speaking. I could tell you, as someone who is kind of on the front line with the community, most folks don't have a good understanding of the labyrinthine structure of federal government in general, especially as it pertains to local, state, and federal government. There's been no federal indictments for any of these people that are alleged to have conspired to frame her for murder. No one will listen to Drew. So when we explain to people that the federal government not indicting people is meaningful, they just say, well, it's just one government washing the hand or scratching the back of the other. Drew, don't say anything, because no one believes a single word you say on this channel anymore. You have no credibility left. Katherine, what can you say based off of your experience or your just legal expertise? Does the federal government usually sweep up the crimes of the state government?
Well, I will tell you this, the feds in Massachusetts, the number one thing the U.S. Attorney's Office allows to do here is indict politicians and local, state reps. And so if there was probable cause to indict someone, I can promise you there is nothing I would be more confident in saying that if there was probable cause to indict anyone, they would have indicted. And, at the same time, you have to think about, even if, okay, so say, well, this is what I sometimes try to like present to people when we come to sort of the federal grand jury. If they presented evidence and they thought that Karen Reed was actually being framed, then that means that your federal government allowed what they know to be an innocent woman stand trial for homicide. And she could have potentially been found guilty of homicide and would have been imprisoned. And the feds don't just get to come in and be like, oh, she's actually innocent, let her out of state prison. that's not how it works. So to me, it's like, well, either there was or there wasn't. The lack of indictments after a 3-year investigation, to me, I mean, yes, can you say for certain that means there was no probable cause, there was not anything, but there wasn't enough for anyone to do anything. And to me, that's as close as you can get to, them without them saying what you think is the case is not the case.
Ruin it, Drew.
I have said I am like, I have been validated. I can sleep very deeply tonight because I've been saying that since episode 1. Like, nobody. Well, I've been making 2 points with this. Everyone keeps shouting at me that you can indict a ham sandwich. For instance, look at Karen Reed. You can indict a ham sandwich. She wasn't indicted. She was arrested. Okay, you can indict a ham sandwich. On the federal level, the federal grand jury, which is in secret, somebody was even charged for leaking information from there. You can still indict that same ham sandwich, and you've got, what the defense has like arrogantly termed the House defendants. You have 5 ham sandwiches running around, but there are 0 indictments. So to me, that is like solid evidence / proof / everything. And then to build on what you say, that's what I've been saying all along. There is nobody in their right mind in the federal government that's going to go, man, there's something going on in this Norfolk County DA's office. Let's just put the case on hold and see if she gets convicted or not. And if she gets convicted, then we'll just undo, come on. Like, this
it's just not a reasonable, it's just not reasonable to me. Why would they, they wouldn't risk it. And if they would, then we have a bigger problem than Karen Reed, really.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I completely agree.
Any final or closing thoughts? Anything that's been rubbing you the wrong way about Karen Reed, or anything that's been happening recently? Do you think there's some of the people in our chats tonight were really begging for any kind of criminal charges to come out of this? Witness intimidation, witness tampering. Do you hold out any hope that maybe we could nail her like OJ 9 years later with the burglary and really send her to jail for a long time on a relatively petty crime compared to murder?
If I'm being totally honest, I don't think that it's worth pursuing. I know they want to get into the phones and they want to try, but I think it's very unlikely you will get a conviction on Karen Reed on anything in Massachusetts for a while. And so I think it's a waste of resources. I really do. Even if you find something there, I just don't know that it's worth. And to be honest, because the Norfolk County DA's office is so tainted from this, like, nobody trusts. I mean, even the way I look at it, I'm like, you're going to have the same people investigate her and indict her and tell all these people. It just looks right. You know what I mean? It looks wrong. So I think just go to the civil case and put everything on the table in the civil case, because that might actually be more telling than anything else. And to be honest, if you charge her with witness intimidation, then she has a 5th. And so then you're not going to get much out of her in civil court. So I actually think strategically, if we're big picture, you let the criminal charges go and go after her in civil.
Did you ever for 1 second think that she was going to testify?
No, I did not. Okay. Well, because she had so many, to be honest, it's so many people are like, oh, she would. Why wouldn't she? Number one, we all know defendants don't testify. Number two, she talks so much and she had so many, inconsistent statements that it wouldn't be worth the risk.
Yeah, I can sum my thought and theory up as like, I consider Alan Jackson to be Harvey Weinstein's attorney. I consider him to be Kevin Spacey's attorney, and I consider him to be Karen Reed's attorney. Now, he's also the prosecutor that successfully prosecuted the Phil Spector case. So I respect his game, and I see what he did. He ripped Johnny Cochran's vibe right off, but he was successful. So as much as I hate to not like him, I love hating him.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that makes sense.
Well, I think it's, you have to recognize, you know, when you see people think outside the box, right? And so what he's able to do for his clients is something, he's sort of mastered this ability at attacking different things that most lawyers wouldn't attack. I mean, you started in the Kevin Spacey case. I mean, I remember when that was happening here in Massachusetts, and he basically, he was like 18, 19, and it was the son of a local news anchor, Heather Unruh. She was like, you know, local news for a long, long time. And he just like ruined their lives, like put them on the scene, destroyed the father, I mean, accusing them all kinds of things. And that was my first introduction to him. It was like, whoa, this is a guy who's, you know, there are, listen, if your life is on the line, you want the kind of attorney who is going to go to the line and maybe cross it a little bit. You know, do I love that in terms of ethical responsibilities as a lawyer? But you can't say that Alan Jackson is someone who is not going to, you know, go to the wall for his client. And ultimately, you know, you have to respect that the strategy was very, very effective given the strength of the case and what they were able to do. You know what I mean? So, I mean, certainly worth his money.
I'm going, I'll go with this. If we're at war, I definitely want him in the foxhole, but when the battle's over, I definitely want to rush to the shower. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, like I feel slimy. It's the same. And I'll tell you this, like, I don't like the Aiden guy and whatever. I'm a nobody. He's not. He's making, you know, money hand over fist off of this case. But I will say this, he's got these like cult-like vibes. He's got the he's got the David Koresh kind of charm. Yeah. He's got following. He's got the you know, I can't think of other cult leaders other than
Manson.
Yeah, man, he's got man appeal. Like you know,
people will do stuff for him for sure.
Drew loves Manson. He has his album.
I do.
I love Manson too. I was like obsessed with Manson in like my 20s. I read all these kinds of books and Helter Skelter. Did you ever read that by
Are you a fan of Vincent Bugliosi? Because I no longer am. I recently read some more another book on him.
I haven't read anything of his. I read that in the Sea Will Tell, but that was a long time ago. There's an
allegation that he suborned perjury in a death penalty case, which under California law would make him eligible for that same punishment. So there's some stuff about Vincent Bugliosi that never came out.
Yeah, I know that's from a different era, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Anything else? Any closing ideas or comments on the case?
Not really, but I mean, there's going to be lots to come. You know, it's sort of nowhere near over it. And, you know, like with the criminal case, there's interest in legal matters, you know, the move into federal court. So there's going to be plenty to talk about, even though, you know, civil is different than criminal. I think we might learn some more stuff.
Well, you could do a real service by letting people know the difference between criminal and civil law. Again, as someone who's taking phone calls from people about cars that were sold to people without ever getting a title and things like this, whatever you could do to educate the public. Where can they find you on YouTube so that they can stay abreast of everything going on in this trial?
So I'm at Note My Objection, NOTEMYOBJECTION. That's everywhere. Mainly one. I started posting a little bit more longer form content, so I can kind of explain, you know, these kinds of conversations have a little bit more. I've been posting for a long time on TikTok. So basically, any social, you can find me there talking about some sort of legal case or political issue.
We will link her stuff in the comments. Please leave us a comment and like and share the video. Katherine, I'd love to have you back at some point to talk a little bit more about Matthew Birchmore and maybe a little bit as the trial progresses, as the civil trial progresses. If you're up
absolutely,
for it, hey, that's great. John, I think
thanks for having me.
we can't thank you enough for shedding some light, especially with your local flavor.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back. I want you to brush up on Wendy Adelson and give me some hope that she's going to face some charges at some point.
Yeah, I think so.
But thanks so much, everybody. Go over to Note My Objection, hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment on her videos, help drive the algorithm. You could do the same thing for us if you like us too. and check out all the back catalog on both of our channels. We appreciate you guys so much. Drew, Catherine, thanks so much for an interesting conversation, and thanks to everybody who joined us in the chats tonight. We always appreciate you. Marine's Blood and Tanya and Pascaline and all these people who dropped super chats and all that. Thanks so much, everybody. Drew, it's been an amazing episode.
Yes.
1,000 episodes of Comm Center.
1,000 episodes. This is
10,000 episodes.
hour.
10,000 episodes.